Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to be pulling up my presentation here really quickly. So just give me a moment to make sure I get the right one. Happy to see everyone. So my name is Tammy Fordham. I am the Alaska Operations Office Director. I've been on a detail specifically focused on ANCSA. Some of you may have been hearing from us either at the Alaska Forum on the Environment or Alaska Tribal Conference on Environmental Management. And we've been excited to really talk about this program. And so I'm going to be speaking a bit about the overview, and I'm joined by our co-presenters, Tim Hamlin and Melissa Winters, who are with the Land Chemicals and Redevelopment Division. There's also other Alaska team members who are part of the ANCSA program that are online. And I know I've seen some other EPA staff, so just welcome all of you here. Hopefully you're seeing the screen. Are you all seeing my slides right now? Okay, good.
Yes,
That's
we are.
Good. So, I've been with EPA for 22 years, most of that time in Alaska. And so it's just an honor to get to be here today as we're talking about this program guidance. And we'll just do a little brief overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who's going to talk about the priorities this year for the Contaminated Lands Assistance Agreement Program. And Melissa will talk about how to apply. And then we'll have time at the end for questions. And just know that, if we don't get to your question today, or if you want to talk one-on-one, that's always an option. So with that, I'm going to get us started. So I did the intros. So I think folks, maybe if you haven't heard about this program, this is really something that started over just about a year ago, where we had some engagement in Alaska at interagency level. I think folks know that it's been a priority for the state. It's a priority for this administration to address contaminated lands in Alaska, particularly those that were conveyed under ANCSA that were contaminated at the time of conveyance. And a part of this program is really, of course, to enter into cooperative agreements while you're here today, to achieve some on-the-ground results in this field season. We know that's ambitious, but we think it's achievable. While we've been hiring up staff to work on this, including folks here on the line, to launch this program, we're really excited about trying to get out into the field to perform some activities and site assessments. Some of you may have engaged with either the state or the site assessment program in the region. Another goal with respect to this program, which is perhaps just as important, this year we're launching this program, but we're also really interested in working with the large community of eligible entities on what the future of this looks like for us in Alaska and for us at EPA. And additionally, we're working on an inventory of contaminated sites that will be available. I know folks have probably seen on the website that there's an interim inventory, but we're working with the state and other federal agencies to continue to refine that data. So stay tuned for more of all of that. I think just wanted to acknowledge ANTHC and the ANCSA Partnership Group. That's a great opportunity to get updates on all of this as we go along. So up until this point, we've really been leveraging existing resources. So there might be folks on this call today that are part of a tribal response program through brownfields, or perhaps you work for the state and you work with EPA through a partnership focused on brownfields or the cleanup programs. Additionally, we have the Indian Environmental General Assistance Program that's been funding tribes in Alaska for quite some time. That's been a real opportunity to build capacity, to be engaged at the community level, and to support technical training. And so I just want to acknowledge the work that's been going on across the state to leverage engagement when it comes to addressing contaminated lands. And I think just know that those folks are resources for any project that might be moving forward. I just wanted to take a moment so that you can kind of see the larger picture. You know, we'll be focused today on the new program, the $20 million program that's specifically for addressing contaminated lands. We additionally have received exactly $7.5 million in congressionally directed spending projects that are for the state of Alaska, the Alaska Native Village Corporation Association, and the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. And EPA is working with those entities on those work plans, and those will be additional opportunities to engage in the future as soon as those are awarded. And our partners, I imagine, will have future opportunities to talk with you about those efforts. And all of this, you know, is directly connected. It's all going to be helping refine the inventory, whether it's EPA getting out on the ground directly, or state partners, or our tribal partners through this program. So why you're here today, right? You want to hear about the Contaminated Lands Assistance Program. In the FY23 Omnibus, Congress appropriated resources for EPA to establish and implement a program to assist Alaska tribal entities with addressing contamination on lands conveyed under ANCSA. Further, they helped provide some explanatory language about the purpose of these funds to support the inventory, verification, assessment, and remediation of these sites, as well as related community outreach involvement. In May, we published the opportunity to apply, and also you have hopefully seen the assistance listing, which is out there additionally for your review. The objectives of the assistance agreements are twofold. One, really to characterize, assess, and conduct planning and community involvement activities related to these lands, and to carry out cleanup activities at contaminated sites. The entire constellation, as we like to say in Alaska, of eligible entities are the Alaska Native corporations, village and regional, the tribal governments that are recognized, the Alaska Native nonprofits, the intertribal consortia, and also Alaska Native Nonprofit Association. So just recognizing that in Alaska, in any given community, it might take a partnership effort to really move forward on addressing contaminated lands, whether it's village corporation, the regional, or maybe a tribal government or other tribal entity working together to partner to address these issues. The eligible uses of the funding are really, these are the broad goals, and then Tim will be talking about the highlights of this year's priorities. But overall, the approaches that we've outlined in the assistance agreement program guidance is for planning and site development at individual sites, or perhaps where there are multiple sites, you know, through an area-wide approach, activities that help with scoping, an assessment, and conducting environmental sampling and analysis to determine the extent of contamination, site cleanup approaches, which are, you know, all aligned with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation cleanup process, conducting environmental confirmation, developing reports, doing effective community engagement, and working with the Alaska Native community around culturally sensitive protocols when you're doing project implementation. And there are other activities that are highlighted in the documents on page 9 and 10 for your review. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Hanlon, who is our division director for the Land Chemicals and Redevelopment Division. And it's his division who will ultimately be signing off on these assistance agreements. And it's my pleasure to get to introduce Tim, who's been longstanding team member here at Region 10. So thank you, Tim, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy, and thanks everyone who's in attendance today for your interest in this program. Excuse me. Yeah, Tammy, I think has done already sort of sent the message. I'm just really going to continue to try and highlight for everyone's benefit what we're looking to accomplish this year with a handful of awards, and emphasize our interest in continuing to engage the many eligible entities as we think about how this program can be implemented in the future. And I'll say on that, you know, we have $20 million that was given to us in the FY23 Omnibus. Senator Murkowski has been the driver on getting that funding, and we know that she is interested in in future budgets having similar amounts. So because we know of that interest, we are really hoping, and as Tammy said, it's ambitious and we hope achievable, to have some field work done, some results done this coming field season. And so that we can show Congress, so you in Alaska can show Congress that working together with EPA, we can get results on the ground that have been frankly taken far too long when this has been left to the federal government alone. So, so the thing to keep in mind, the first two items on this slide are really what is included in the omnibus language that is basically the program language that we are implementing. So the requirements that Congress articulated were that we're talking about contaminated sites that were conveyed under ANCSA and were contaminated at the time of conveyance. That's probably the most important single concept to sort of embrace here, because that's really defines what we're doing. And very closely related to that, the site must be on an EPA inventory of contaminated ANCSA lands. Now, many on the call, I'm sure, are familiar with the BLM inventory, and we are adopting it for now. We know we want to enhance it over time, but we are adopting it as is for now and using it to meet this requirement for the grants that we hope to award this year. I should say the cooperative agreements we're hoping to award this year. So basically keep in mind that these are ANCSA contaminated lands that were contaminated at the time of conveyance and appear on an inventory. So those are sort of the congressional requirements, with the eye towards being able to achieve some demonstrable results as soon as possible. What we're looking for this year are applications for work on sites that are either owned by the grant applicant, or the applicant has a clear right of access to the listed site. There's probably 500 or so qualified eligible entities. And so what we're trying to highlight is we really need to hear, we're really hoping to hear from those who can get down, can get in the field and get work done. And we think owning the site or having a clear right of access to the site is part of what it takes to be able to achieve quick results. And then of course, for results to be achieved quickly, we're also looking for those who have the capacity today to achieve the program objectives. So what does that mean? That really comes down to having qualified personnel, already owning any equipment that you might need to accomplish the objectives, and the ability, and this again is where we think it's achievable, we know it's ambitious, that there are actions demonstrating results that can be included in the first quarterly report under the assistance agreement. So it probably means somewhere around the fall and sometime this calendar year, maybe late fall, or hopefully by the end of the year. So that's what we're hoping we can do. So we are also, because we believe, although Congress used the word contamination and didn't really define the term, we believe from other things Congress said in adopting and creating this program that the intent is really focused on hazardous waste. And so we're interested in projects that address hazardous waste because we think that's what Congress is most wanting us to focus on. And we all recognize that Alaska is on the front lines of climate change. And so if there are opportunities to address that challenge as well, we think that is important for us to consider. So those are the things we're looking for. And I say, again, the first two bullets, we are compelled, that defines what this program does. The others are more in our discretion, but that's where we're hoping to work with as many of you as we can to get some work done on the ground this summer. And then know that, again, in the future, we're not going to continue to be this focused on what can be done immediately. We just think this is important as we get this new program started to show that's effective. So if we can go to the next slide. So yeah, here's where that really comes home to roost. So we just did the grant announcement on May 4th, and we're hoping we can get complete funding packages. Well, get funding packages as complete as possible to us by June 9th. And then there'll be a couple of weeks where we can work through some of the details. This program's got a lot of potential complications. We've got a couple of weeks to work with applicants and we hope to have final and complete applications in hand on the 23rd. And then after that, we hope to announce selections as soon as July 10th, and then hopefully make awards by July 28th. That obviously doesn't leave a lot of the field season. So again, we're just trying to highlight what we're hoping to do. I want to highlight that also that those final applications have to be submitted through grants.gov. So we have no choice. We cannot consider grant applications that don't come to us through grants.gov, although please also copy your EPA project officer with whatever you're submitting in grants.gov. So we have a couple ways to make sure we're seeing it. And then we're hoping not to consider extensions on that deadline, but on the 23rd deadline, if you can ask for an extension from your EPA contact. So June 9th, June 23rd, those are where you come in and hopefully give us what we need to be able to select your project. We will try and do that by the 10th with an eye towards having a couple weeks after that an award. Again, a very ambitious time frame. We'll see what we can do. We'll hope for the best. If we go to the next slide, we can tell you a little bit more why we have some reasons to be optimistic about how ambitious we're being. We're not trying to award more than a handful of agreements. We're thinking something in the neighborhood of 6, and that's probably 6 maximum. So what we've done is essentially of that 20 million, we've allocated, not in any formal final binding way, but for management purposes, for program launch purposes, we've allocated 600,000 for site characterization and site assessment, and then cleanup takes more. And again, we're not thinking of a comprehensive cleanup at this first stage, but some initial removal actions, some initial response, again, things that can show how we're cleaning things up on the ground. But we know that takes more money. So on the ground work, the actual cleanup work, we've set aside 3 million for roughly 3 cooperative agreements. So that's just to give you some numbers to work with as you develop your own budgets. Keep these in mind. Again, there's room to maneuver on our end. If your own determination of what it takes to do what you have in mind is different than 200,000 for a site assessment and $1 million for a initial removal or cleanup, we can work with you on that. So next slide, please. And then just final note on what the nature of the assistance agreement. We're intending to do these as cooperative agreements, just as we do with the Brownfields program, which is also under my division, and Melissa Winters is going to talk to you some more about some of the details on how to work with us. And Melissa is the branch chief of the branch that has both Brownfields program and this program. So cooperative agreements, what does that really mean? That means EPA is more involved than with some of the other alternative approaches we have to awarding assistance agreements. And it really comes down to the term substantial involvement. So we will be substantially involved with applicants and with those who receive funding as we move forward. And that includes, once an award has been granted, monitoring performance to see how things are going, collaborating regarding any challenges you may be facing on how to address what you're trying to accomplish, approving qualifications of key personnel. But again, I want to emphasize, we do not select those personnel. We just want to make sure you've got the right people you need before we give you funding and on after the funding's been awarded, and then reviewing results and the reports that you would be preparing for us. So just know we're an active partner as we award these agreements and work with you on them. I think with that, I am handing the floor to Melissa, who's going to talk a little bit more about what it takes to apply.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So as Tim mentioned, I'm the manager of the branch that is charged with implementing this grant program. My part of the presentation is to really share with you the nuts and bolts of what you need to submit to us by June 9th in draft, and then June 23rd for the final. Everything that I'm going to present on is also in the program guidance and in more detail in the program guidance, and there's some tools and templates there for you as well. So the very first thing, and this part, funding package component, starts on page 12 of the program guidance. But I did want to first, I'm going to just walk through these. So first and foremost, want to call your attention to the requirement that any organization that's applying does need to have an active SAM.gov and grants.gov registration. There's lots more information in detail on how to get those in Appendix A. I want to just emphasize, though, that if your organization does not have an active SAM.gov registration, I would get going on that as soon as possible. We have heard that there can be some delay in processing those, and we wouldn't want that to be a barrier for anyone submitting for this opportunity. So if you don't have one of those, or if you're not sure and you're interested in applying for this funding opportunity, I would check on that immediately and go ahead and register so you can get that going. And again, SAM.gov takes a little bit longer, but you also will need to have a grants.gov account. The next piece is you will be required to provide documentation that demonstrates that the project site is on the EPA interim inventory. So Tammy and Tim talked earlier about that being a requirement for funding through this program. It needs to be on the EPA interim inventory, and we need to be able to show that it was contaminated at the time of conveyance. So some of the information that you'll need to include to demonstrate that are listed here, and again in the program guidance itself. You'll need to provide the site name as it's listed in the inventory, in the interim inventory, location of the site or other identifying information, documentation showing that it is INCSA conveyed land, documentation that indicates the type of contamination. As Tim described, we're looking for this priority as hazardous contamination, the documentation that indicates it was contaminated prior to conveyance, and then finally documentation of land ownership since conveyance. If you go on to the next slide, if you're familiar, if you've had an EPA grant before, these will look very familiar. This is kind of the mandatory set of forms that must be included in any EPA grant application. I'm going to talk in more detail on the detailed work plan, task description, and that the first item there. But again, this is a standard set of forms for EPA grants. And we do ask by that June 9th deadline if you will please submit the draft submission of these. It's just we found that it's helpful for the project manager to have a chance to review these forms, just make sure that they're fully complete. If there's any questions that they have, we can catch those before they're submitted to grants.gov. A key thing is that the budget information in the standard form 424A does need to match your work plan. So that's one thing that we look for in a review. It's just easier. It goes a bit faster if we're able to catch anything that needs to be further completed or doesn't quite match up, if we're able to review those forms before they're submitted through grants.gov. So again, these will look, if you've had federal grants before, EPA grants, these will be very familiar. It's an application for federal assistance, the detailed budget information form, a key contacts form. There's a pre-award compliance review, certification regarding lobbying. And then only if your budget includes indirect costs, you'll need to provide us with the current approved version of your indirect cost rate agreement. You only need to do that if you have indirect costs as part of the budget. And all of these forms are available in grants.gov. Later on, we have some links that take you directly to this particular assistance listing. And in that, if you follow those links, there will be all of these forms available there electronically. We lost the slides. I'm not controlling them, but when we get those back up, if we can move to the next one.
Yeah, apologies, Melissa. I had my computer cord, so I'm going to get them back up here again. Let's see. Are you seeing?
Yes, they're there, but it has the notes version.
Okay, let me stop. Apologies, everybody. Okay, let me get back to the slide you were on.
Yes, that's it. Slide 16. Great, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so on the previous one, there was at the top, the work plan is a required part of the funding package. Here, just a little bit more detail on what we need to see in a work plan. And there is a template that's provided in Appendix B of the program guidance. You don't have to use that work plan template. It's available to you as a tool. It's intended to be helpful to support applicants going through this process and developing these materials. So if you have a work plan template or something else you like to use that has all the required information, you're welcome to use that. But these are the categories of information that we are looking for in the work plan. I'll just walk through these a few here. Again, there's a lot more detail in the program guidance, but we'll be looking for a description of each task and activity, the schedule for that, who the lead on that will be, and then the outputs and outcomes that are expected. For this first round of demonstration projects, we are interested in early outputs and outcomes from the project. Additionally, we will need, if the project includes any environmental measurements, including sampling or data compilation activities, or using any existing environmental data, a quality assurance project plan, sometimes referred to as a QAP, will need to be submitted to EPA, and the QAP must be approved by EPA before conducting and reporting any environmental measurements. If you don't have one of those developed or in place, or if you need support on the quality assurance piece, there's a lot of resources on our EPA website, and we have contacts here in our Region 10 office that we can connect you with to answer specific questions on that. But having an approved quality assurance project plan will be required if there's any sampling or environmental measures that are involved with the project. Next is the detailed budget table. This will lay out by budget category what your proposed plan is for your project. This should also match what you have in the 424A, one of those standards forms that's part of the package. There also need to be a description of how progress will be tracked, measured, and evaluated. And finally, a discussion of how the project aligns with the state of Alaska's Contaminated Sites Program cleanup process. So ADEC, Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, has a Contaminated Sites Program that oversees and in some cases conducts cleanup of contaminated sites. And so the work plan should indicate how this project will align with DEC's program. And again, I encourage those interested in this funding to take a look further at the program guidance. All these things are described in much more detail there. And again, there's that Appendix B work plan template that is intended to help you put this all together. And then on the next slide is just to recap, you've seen the timeline already. As mentioned, it's brisk, so it's worth mentioning again what we're hoping for. Again, all of us recognize that this is very ambitious, but again, it just is probably worth reiterating what we'd like to see by June 9th and June 23rd. So by June 9th, the eligible entities, those that are pursuing this funding, must share a draft of the complete funding package with the program contact in advance of submitting through grants.gov. We'll review, ask our questions if we have any, and then give a thumbs up to go ahead and submit through grants.gov. By June 23rd, that final application must be submitted through grants.gov and copied to the EPA program contact unless you have an in-writing extension request approved by EPA. Again, because those are brisk, I just want to emphasize it seems like a silly thing, but the SAM.gov and the grants.gov account registrations are important. So I'd encourage people to check on that right away if you are interested in applying to this opportunity. The funding opportunity is listed there along with the assistance listing number. We have some direct links that go right to the program guidance and all the forms in grants.gov. There's also really wonderful, I think it's great, the EPA contamination on INCSA conveyed lands website, because it's kind of a landing page for all of these items. It's got a link to the inventory. It has a link to the grants.gov program guidance. It has all of this information kind of compiled in one place. So I'd encourage you to go there if you're looking for something, can't find it. It also has our contact information listed there. And Tammy, I'm gonna turn it back to you, I believe, to go over who to contact and questions.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And I know Julie has might have some questions in the chat. Just wanted to put our program contact information up here. I know that it's on the web. We've been getting folks asking questions, and just want to acknowledge Brenda Cook is on the line. I see Jeff Estes is on the screen. I don't know if you can see him, but he's our going to be helping negotiate these cooperative agreements this year. So we're excited to have him be a part of the team. And I know there are others on the line that have been a big part of this effort. So with that, you can raise your hand before we do some closing comments. If you have questions. Or Julie, do you have anything in the chat?
You know, the only thing I do see in the chat is something that someone brought up, stating that brownfields addresses hazardous substances, pollutants, and contaminants and petroleum, so not just hazardous waste. So will that make a difference for the grants? I'm guessing is maybe the one point of clarification.
You know, I see Tim coming on. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, Tammy, if you want to take it, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the beauty of this is the fact that keep leveraging the brownfields grants, right? Those are really important opportunities. You know, if there's an opportunity to apply for a targeted brownfields assessment or to apply for any of the funding that I know there was a recent round of funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law, there'll be another opportunity. So we want to keep leveraging those resources. But this program, look to the guidance. We actually put also some frequently asked questions around cleanup process and contamination. So I think that it's a different approach, and I think that's important because there's the ability to have a patchwork. So maybe where these ANCSA grants could do work where maybe brownfields couldn't, right? So I think how we work these together to help accelerate cleanup of these lands is really crucial. So Tim, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I will add on. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I'll just add petroleum sites. We know, you know, that they're definitely eligible for funding. Didn't mean to put too narrow a scope when we were describing that. Because we think there's a lot, frankly, that's probably petroleum based, you know, petroleum contamination that we'd be looking at on contaminated ANCSA lands. So, yeah, it's not, you know. You'll see when you read the program guidance, you know, Congress just said contamination. We think they were focused on the more hazardous materials out there, but definitely petroleum would count as one of the things we're ready to fund now.
So there is one
Julie,
question.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. You see it. Great.
I can't see. I'm just, as long as you keep doing that, I can't really see the chat or the hands for some reason.
Yeah, well, for folks that are on the phone, a question did come in the chat that said, so hazardous substances are not necessarily preferred over petroleum?
Not necessarily. That's right.
And if anybody wants to add into the chat or wants to, raise their hand to ask a question, please feel free to.
Hi, my name is Chris. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
Okay.
I've got a client who has an orphan site on the inventory list, and they have a drum dump, in a remote area. And the ideal time for removal of those drums, just based on, seasonal problems, is like the spring, but it's been discussed that they could go out during the first quarter and do reconnaissance to figure out how to get access there and do some characterization of any contents that are left in the drums, or, the distressed vegetation and soil that's been observed. So that would kind of show, boots on the ground kind of progress, and then they could do the removal, within the 12 months. The question is, it seems to me like that could be done under one application as like a cleanup application for funding, where, you're asking for cleanup to remove the drums, but you're doing characterization, along the way that ultimately would be required for removal. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say. I mean, so much for us is going to depend on what we receive in terms of potential, work to be done. But I think we'd love to work with you and explore what might be possible here, and how quickly and how much it sort of meets our near-term objectives. But that certainly sounds like a very viable project for us to fund, even if it weren't in this first wave. But it sounds like exploring possibilities would be in order, and how much priority we put on that particular application might depend on what else we receive. You saw Jeff; he's our one-stop shop when it comes to grant making. So we're going to be doing some triaging and priority setting on our end, depending on how many applications we receive. If we just get like 3, we can probably fund them all 3. If we get like 50, we're going to have to pick and choose. So just to give you an idea what we're thinking about.
Yeah, it's like it's a vegetation issue, with the season. So getting out there in spring is like the ideal time. The other questions spill into more feasibility of, they're a village corporation, and they own a construction subsidiary. And so if they're going forward and naming their subsidiary in the application, who, is capable of carrying out lots of the work and has equipment, what are the rules around procurement to that? Is it something that they can name because we're at the work plan stage and, they're a subsidiary, or, ultimately, there's going to be an end disposal site for those drums, and so, what's involved in, at least at the work plan stage, in bidding that type of work? And, maybe you don't have all the answers on the call, but I'm just thinking forward.
Those are great questions. And what we know is, and what we can say is, federal procurement requirements must be complied with. There is, we're in a little bit, I think, of new terrain here of giving grants to corporations, right? Local and regional corporations are eligible. And as you just described, they may either, the owner may be wanting to use their own company. We still think we have to show that the taxpayer's getting a good deal, and so we believe the procurement requirements must still be met, which usually means going out for a bid. And your question's a really interesting one, and one that we have on our minds is that process exactly the same where the applicant owns the subsidiary? We think it's maybe yes, but honestly, this is new terrain for us, so we'll be having to work this out as we get applications.
Final question. Access is going to be a big issue. It's a remote site to begin with, but once you get there, you got a long way to go to get to the drums. Am I right to assume that a reasonable amount of clearing and building of access to get equipment that would ultimately remove the drums would be an eligible cost under the grant?
You are, and let me use that comment to highlight another angle that we're going to be, addressing here, which is, when EPA awards funds, we have to comply with many laws, including NEPA. So, yeah, there will be the need to look at National Historic Preservation Act compliance, potentially compliance with National Environmental Policy Act. So things that could end up, slowing us down, candidly, are those things that we're demonstrating we really are doing this the right way as we look to, clean sites up. So that is another angle we're mindful of and working on to see if there's ways to do that efficiently and cost effectively. But yeah, want to highlight that those disturbances, if you will, to do what we need to do to clean things up is part of what might require a little bit more consideration about how do we best do this.
I'm going to let somebody else get a word in edgewise before I bombard you with anything else. Thank you.
Well, I'm not seeing any hands raised, but there are some questions coming in the chat. And so I know I've opened it up so folks can see the chat now. But for folks that are on the phone, a question did come in that says, is the burden on the applicant to, quote, prove, unquote, that a site was contaminated at the time of conveyance?
Yeah, that's another really good question. The operable term there is prove. We EPA has to be able to say that the site was contaminated at the time of conveyance before we can clean it up. I think we can. There's some latitude, we believe, in using these funds to verify that it's actually, an ANCSA contaminated site. And then, yeah, what sort of level of confidence do we need to have that it was contaminated at the time of conveyance is one of those things we'll be wrestling with on a case-by-case basis. But our interest is in trying to, resolve doubts in favor of getting the work done. And we think that's congruent with congressional intent. But clearly Congress wants us to spend this money on cleaning up, sites that were contaminated prior to conveyance and not subsequent to conveyance. So there is something we have to wrestle with there inevitably. So, great question, and we'll be working through how to resolve those uncertainties as we get applications.
Thanks for that. Another comment that someone has made, they said, I'm still new to brownfields. My second year took my first year to build the program, and now I'm learning which funding that I can get for cleanup, and found that most of the funding for cleanup we don't qualify for here in Alaska, besides DBAC, and that it's pretty slow itself. So could you elaborate on that?
I'm not sure I can. Melissa?
Yeah, I would just share that, so as was mentioned at the beginning, you can leverage funds between the different programs, but this funding is entirely new set of funding that doesn't have the brownfields eligibility requirements along with it. So I would encourage you, if you have sites or work that meet the criteria for this Contaminate ANCSA Lands Assistance Program, to take a look, because doesn't have the brownfields eligibility requirements. That said, I mean, there are going to be sites and work that the brownfields program and the grants that we have available through it, and like targeted brownfields assessment, that will be an appropriate tool. So the two are related, but this does not have the same requirements as the brownfields program does.
Thanks for that. We have another question in the chat, but first I would just like to invite folks on the phone, if you would like to unmute yourself, if you have any questions that you would like to ask. I know that might take a minute. To unmute, to ask your question, press *6. Okay. Well, until you, if you want to ask a question, you can do *9 to ask to be unmuted and ask a question. So the one question that is in the chat, it says, why does a site have to be on the BLM/EPA list?
I'll take that one because Congress said so. I mean, really, it's built into the omnibus language. It's contaminated at the time of conveyance and on the EPA inventory. And again, we're using the BLM inventory so that we have an inventory to work with right away.
Yeah, this is Tammy. I'll just add, for folks' awareness, there's additional resources right through the Congress-rejected spending that will help further with the verification work associated with inventory. And this initial year, the team is really working to stand up this inventory, working with the federal agencies in the state. So I think stay tuned for the future on, how to get a site added to that list down the road. So initially we're focused on sites that are already on the list. Thanks.
Okay, I see that Nick has a question. Nick, I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, you're unmuted. Great. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Tammy just mentioned that DEC is going to be trying to work on help develop of this inventory too. So I just wanted to introduce myself to everyone on the call. I'm DEC's point of contact for this right now. And so I'm going to drop my email into the chat here. It's nick.waldo@alaska.gov for anyone listening in on the phone. So DEC is also able to help just as you're gathering information about sites. We have a lot of documents on our server and in our files. So if we can be helpful, or if you're looking for our assistance in getting a site added to the inventory, I'd be a good person to reach out to.
And I'll just add, as we, yeah, thank you, Nick. As this program evolves, I mean, one of the things we expect will happen with the assessment side of the program will be changes and additions to the inventory. So so I hope I don't expect the inventory requirement to be a huge barrier to getting work done, except that this goes back to we have to what will be on the inventory is sites that were contaminated at the time of conveyance. So that takes us right back to, do we have sufficient evidence to conclude that it was? So so that and again, that is also built into the congressional language, and just to repeat, we will try and resolve doubts in favor of doing the assessment and cleanup, but we have to be able to show that it meets that pre-conveyance requirement.
This is Chris, anonymous again here. I got another client who is interested in applying, and they've got a ton of sites. And I got into reading the 2016 BLM inventory report, and it was compelling enough for me to read all of the pages. And I'm aware, obviously, there's sites classified different, on the 2019 inventory. And, it's obvious to me that, orphan sites would make a good fit for a program, because there's an implication that they're not in a program and they could either benefit from assessment or cleanup or both. And then there's sites that are cleaned up with institutional controls, or, I don't know what the term is, but undetermined, basically, require confirmation. But I guess my question is, the orphan sites are obviously ones that, I'd be drawn to look at first, as a fit for this. But I'm aware too that sometimes sites are closed with institutional controls, and it could be just an area of the site, or they could be closed for a certain purpose, but there's other things that need to be done, like a building that wasn't looked at that needs to be abated. So, are you guys, thinking one way, like you're looking at sites that are orphan, or are you just looking for good uses of this funding that, support some type of use in moving these sites forward that are on the list, regardless of classification?
Oh, so many good questions there, and interesting topics. So first and foremost, I'll just say for this, what we're trying to do this year in the near term, it's very, what we're looking for is the lowest of low hanging fruit and the most shovel ready of the shovel ready projects. And so if really it's just, can you get on the ground and do the work quickly and show us results? That's really what we're aiming for. In terms of where this program goes, next year, when we expect to allocate the vast bulk of the funds and hopefully have more funds to offer, those questions about doing additional work at sites that have been addressed. Do we do orphan sites or do we also provide funding at sites that might have other funding opportunities? There is a whole lot to consider there, and we definitely want to do that collaboratively with the eligible entities. So we're going to noodle through on what we think might make the most sense and be prepared to talk about that. But right now we're more like we're making our own inventory, if you will, of the many interesting questions that come up, like should we spend money at sites that have institutional controls, and what criteria might we use if we do? And I do think we're inclined to say, orphan sites should be a priority for this funding pot because, there's nothing else. But Congress was very clear and said, we can give money for work where the grantee already has some funding for the same work. So Congress gave us a lot of room to maneuver as we implement this program, and the best way to take all that room to maneuver is something we want to figure out in collaboration with the eligible entities.
So we're going to probably have some follow-up questions like next week. And so should we email those to Tammy and Melissa that's shown on the screen right now? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Not seeing any other questions in the chat, and no one has unmuted themselves or raised their hand with a question. But again, if anybody on the phone wants to, you can press *9 to ask your question, or you can just do *6 to unmute yourself, and you could ask your question right now.
And I see Brenda has her hand up, so it's a great opportunity to introduce Brenda as well, who's helping manage our inventory and has been helpful in providing lists of sites to entities as you look at the inventory. So go ahead, Brenda.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Brenda Cook, and I am the ANCSA Contaminated Lands Inventory Manager. And one of the things that we're working in building this inventory and putting up a common operating picture, which would be available to the public, where they would be able to look to see what the sites are, what their status is, and if they have additional sites that they want to add to the list or propose to add to the list, we'll be able to have that function. And we're hoping to have this up by September of this year.
Thanks for that. Well, I see we are at 1 o'clock Pacific time, which means we're at 12 Alaska time. And so for all of you in Alaska, I'm sure you're ready for lunch. But I do see another hand up. So Lisa, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? And Tammy, do you want to have that be the last one, or? Okay, great.
Well, and I'll help close us out after.
Okay, perfect.
It's great to have you, Lisa. So.
Hey, I more just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Lisa Griswold. I'm with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. We are one of the entities that is receiving the direct funding, excuse me, to work on some of these sites. And I did want to put out there that ANTHC, we already have some funding in place through our brownfields grant as well to look at these sites and already be able to conduct outreach and help people with these sites. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email into the chat. In addition to that, I was going to host a follow-up meeting next Thursday, just for people who, if you had questions or you had comments about the program, and you maybe don't feel comfortable expressing that right now. I was going to go ahead and host a meeting next Thursday, and this would be, sorry, EPA, DEC, but they will not be there. So this will be just for, everyone else. But if you are interested in attending that meeting, you can go ahead and send me an email and I will add you to the meeting invite. It is going to be next Thursday at 11 a.m. Alaska time as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It was great to have that addition, Lisa, and clearly ANTHC is a partner. I think look for additional meetings of the ANCSA partnership group that is hosted by ANTHC, and that's a great opportunity to keep hearing more about this overall program. And really appreciate you, Lisa, having a meeting where folks can talk without the regulators around. As much as we do work on grants, we also realize we're regulators. So I just wanted to say thank you all for being here today. I know there's a lot going on. Thank you for willingness, hopefully, to take on some of this work and work in partnership. This is really an incredible time where we have resources to move forward on accelerating, cleanup in Alaska. And that's just so exciting. I know it's a priority of our regional administrator, as well as our Office of Land and Emergency Management, and clearly this administration to address this injustice. And, I just want to leave us with something that has, I think, been said in different ways today, but we are really looking to document the lessons learned. So, you, Chris, for example, you talked about the season, and that's probably dependent on the region that that work could be done in. And so I think documenting what we're learning about this work and what it takes is going to just help the overall effort in telling the story. We want to tell that story from the perspective of our tribal partners here in Alaska, as well as our state and federal partners, and really doing anything that's going to be lasting and meaningful is going to require trust and comprehensive collaboration between the federal government, the state of Alaska, and our Alaska Native partners. So just thank you again for being here, and look forward to future opportunities where we can continue this discussion and hopefully announce some grants in July. So looking forward to that. And thank you again. And you all just take care.